Rain tapped softly on the shelter roof, a gentle rhythm that echoed through the quiet halls of the Southridge Animal Rescue Center. In kennel number 27, a large brindle-coated pit bull lay curled up on a worn, blue blanket. His name was Buster. For the past year, Buster had watched dogs come and go, tail-wagging puppies, playful terriers, sleek retrievers, all adopted within days or weeks. But he remained. Day after day, month after month, he had become part of the background. Reliable, predictable, forgotten. Buster was a good boy, and everyone at the shelter knew it. The volunteers adored him. He sat politely when visitors passed, his eyes full of cautious hope. He never barked aggressively or jumped on the gate. He'd tilt his head, tail thumping the ground softly, as if to say, "I'm here. I'll wait." And wait he did. The truth was, Buster had once had a home. He'd been found wandering the edge of a neighborhood park late one night, malnourished and with a frayed collar around his neck. No microchip. No one came looking. Some assumed he'd been dumped. Others speculated he had escaped. But Buster never told. He simply wagged his tail when spoken to and curled up politely at bedtime. Despite his loving nature, potential adopters passed him over time and time again. Some flinched at the sight of his muscular build. Others looked at his broad head and deep chest and saw danger where there was none. "He's a pit bull," they'd whisper. "We just can't take the risk." But the volunteers knew better. "Buster," said Linda, the shelter's longest-serving staff member, one cloudy Wednesday morning, "your family's out there. I know it. You're gonna make someone so happy." Buster licked her hand and nuzzled into her side. His brown eyes were soft, warm, and trusting. He still believed, and that belief made all the difference. That same week, across town, in a modest white house with red shutters and a neatly kept lawn, the Grayson family was still reeling from a loss. Their beloved golden retriever, Duke, had passed away at the age of 13. The house had grown strangely silent without him. His food bowl sat untouched. His bed was still in the corner of the living room, and the leash hung quietly by the door. Megan Grayson, the mother of the family, often found herself glancing at that leash, a hollow ache settling in her chest. Her husband, Tom, did his best to stay strong for their children, Liam, aged 11, and little Ellie, just 6, but even he struggled to come home to the stillness. One evening, over dinner, Liam hesitated before saying softly, "Do you think we'll ever have another dog?" The question hung in the air like a fragile balloon. "I don't know, sweetheart," Megan replied gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's still hard. But Duke wouldn't want us to be sad forever," Ellie added, her voice small but certain. "He'd want us to love again." That night, after the kids were in bed, Tom and Megan sat together in the living room, a photo of Duke resting between them. They talked, not just about the dog they'd lost, but the idea of opening their hearts again. Slowly, the idea turned into a maybe, then a plan. 2 days later, they visited the Southridge Animal Rescue Center. The Graysons walked past kennel after kennel, pausing to greet eager pups who bounced and barked and begged for attention. But nothing clicked. Then they reached number 27. Buster was lying on his blanket, head resting on his paws. He looked up slowly, his eyes locking with Megan's. He didn't jump or bark. He just wagged his tail once, soft and sure, and tilted his head. "Hi there," Megan said, crouching down in front of the kennel. Buster stood and stepped forward, pressing his nose gently against the gate. "He's beautiful," Tom murmured. "His name's Buster," Linda said, walking up behind them. "Been here nearly a year." "A year?" Megan's eyebrows lifted. "Why hasn't anyone taken him?" Linda shrugged sadly. "He's a pit bull. People make assumptions, but he's one of the sweetest dogs I've ever met." Tom looked at Megan, who looked back at Buster. The dog stood perfectly still, waiting. His eyes said everything. No desperation, no fear, just hope. "Can we meet him?" Megan asked. Within minutes, they were in the shelter's enclosed yard. Buster approached each of them carefully, allowing Tom to scratch behind his ears, then gently licking Ellie's hand. Liam threw a tennis ball, and Buster trotted after it, bringing it back with a goofy grin. "He's so calm," Megan whispered. "He's perfect," Ellie declared. The Graysons spent nearly 2 hours with Buster that day. They laughed, played, sat quietly with him in the grass. By the time they left, Megan's eyes were damp. They returned 2 days later with a leash and collar of their own. Buster's adoption was finalized on a Friday afternoon. Linda hugged him tightly before letting go. "You're going to be so loved," she whispered into his ear. The car ride to the Graysons' home was quiet at first. Buster sat between Liam and Ellie in the backseat, unsure of the new world passing by outside the window. But soon, Liam rested his hand on Buster's head, and the dog sighed deeply, content, safe. At the house, they opened the door and let him explore. He padded cautiously through the living room, sniffed the kitchen, peered into the bedrooms. When he reached the family room and saw the empty dog bed by the window, he walked over and curled into it. Tom and Megan stood in the doorway, hands clasped. "Guess it's his now," Tom said softly. That evening, the house was filled with warmth again. Buster laid his head on Ellie's lap while Liam read aloud from a book. Megan snapped a photo of the moment, Buster's eyes half closed in bliss, the children beaming beside him. Later, as the moon rose and the house settled into quiet, Buster lay on his new blanket in his new home, his heart full for the first time in a long while. He didn't know everything that lay ahead. But he knew this. He wasn't waiting anymore. He had found his family. And they had found him. Mornings at the Grayson house had changed. Where once silence greeted the early hours, now the rhythmic thump of a tail against the hardwood floor signaled the start of each day. Buster was always up first. He'd stretch long and low, yawning so wide you could see every tooth, then pad quietly to the children's bedrooms. He'd nudge Liam's arm gently with his nose, then trot across the hall to Ellie's room, where he'd sit patiently until she stirred. Sometimes she'd wake to find his head resting on her blanket, his warm eyes blinking slowly. "Morning, Buster," she'd whisper with a sleepy grin, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Did you have good dreams?" Yes, he always did now. Buster fit into the family like he'd always belonged. He followed Megan around the house, tail wagging whenever she opened the fridge or ran water at the sink. In the afternoons, he'd wait by the window for the kids to return from school, then race to the door as soon as he heard their voices. He was part protector, part sibling, and part living teddy bear. Despite his large, muscular frame, Buster moved with surprising gentleness. Ellie would sometimes crawl under the dining room table during games of pretend, and Buster would follow, ducking his head and lying down quietly beside her. He let her decorate him with tiaras and feather boas, never once protesting. When Liam built Lego cities on the living room rug, Buster curled beside him like a furry sentry, careful not to disturb a single block. Tom, who had once been hesitant about adopting another dog so soon after Duke's passing, had become Buster's quiet companion. On early weekend mornings, while the rest of the house slept, Tom would leash Buster and they'd walk through the neighborhood in peaceful silence. They didn't need words, just the crunch of leaves underfoot, the crisp morning air, and the sound of Buster's collar jingling with each step. But not everything was perfect. It started one afternoon at the park. The Graysons had taken Buster for a walk on the Greenbelt Trail that wrapped behind the local playground. The path was wide, shaded by tall oaks, and scattered with birdsong. Ellie held the leash, while Liam tossed sticks ahead for Buster to chase. As they rounded a bend, another family came into view, a man and woman with a young boy and a fluffy golden doodle. The boy pointed at Buster, his eyes wide. "Is that a pit bull?" he asked, voice high with alarm. The man stopped walking. "Careful," he said to his wife and child. "That's one of those dangerous breeds." Megan's cheeks flushed. "He's very well behaved," she said calmly. But the woman pulled their dog closer. "They're unpredictable," she said, giving Buster a wide berth. Buster's ears drooped, confused by the sudden tension. The Graysons continued their walk, but the incident clung to them like a shadow. That night at dinner, Liam frowned over his plate. "Why do people think Buster's bad?" he asked. "They just don't know him," Megan replied gently. "But it's not fair," Ellie added. "He's the nicest dog in the world." Tom nodded slowly. "Sometimes people are scared of what they don't understand." From his spot near the fireplace, Buster lifted his head and rested his chin on his paws. He didn't understand either. The incident wasn't isolated. There were other times, neighbors pulling their kids away, people crossing the street during walks, or a woman at the vet's office who requested a different waiting room because of the pit bull. Megan tried to shield the children from most of it. She explained that breed stereotypes were often built on fear and misinformation. But the words didn't take away the sting. One weekend, Ellie painted a sign in bright colors. Buster is kind. Buster is gentle. Buster is family. They hung it on the front fence, right above a photo Megan had taken of Buster with a daisy tucked behind his ear. It made the mailman smile. And the neighbors 2 doors down finally agreed to let their daughter pet him during a walk. Slowly, hearts began to change. Then came the storm. It arrived without warning on a Thursday evening, the sky turning dark and rumbling like a beast overhead. Winds whipped through the trees, knocking branches to the ground. Rain fell in thick sheets. Lightning lit up the sky like shattered glass. Ellie was terrified of storms. She clutched her stuffed bunny and buried herself in blankets. Buster jumped onto the bed beside her, something he never did unless invited, and curled up against her, his body a warm shield. "You're not scared?" she whispered into his fur. Buster licked her cheek and lay still, every muscle relaxed. Downstairs, the power flickered out. Megan lit candles while Tom checked the weather alerts. There was talk of a possible tornado nearby. Sirens wailed in the distance. Suddenly, they heard a crash outside. Tom ran to the back door. A tree limb had fallen onto their neighbor's fence, and beyond it, the faint sound of barking. Shouts followed. It was the Petersons, their elderly dog Toby stuck outside. "I'll go," Tom said, grabbing a flashlight and his raincoat. But Buster was already at the door, alert and insistent. Tom hesitated. "Take him," Megan said. "He'll protect you." Buster and Tom dashed into the storm. The rain was blinding, the wind howling. They climbed over the fallen branch, reaching the Petersons' yard. Toby, a white mutt with shaky legs, was trapped beneath a smaller limb, whimpering. Tom struggled to lift it, until Buster wedged his shoulders beneath the branch and heaved. It was enough. Tom pulled Toby free, then guided the frightened dog to safety while Buster stayed beside him, nose nudging, tail steady. By the time they returned, soaked but safe, neighbors had gathered on their porches, watching with wide eyes. "Is that the pit bull?" someone asked. Tom nodded. "That's Buster. And he just saved a life tonight." After that, something shifted. People began stopping during walks to ask about him. A boy from Ellie's class brought his mom over to meet the hero dog. Even the skeptical woman from the vet's office sent an apology note through the mail, with a box of treats attached. But Buster didn't care about recognition. He still rose early each morning to nudge the kids awake. He still guarded the Lego cities and wore pink tiaras like a prince. He still waited by the window each afternoon, tail wagging as the bus rolled up the street. To him, the world had always been full of love. Now, the world was finally seeing him for who he truly was. One night, as the family sat by the fireplace, Tom scratched behind Buster's ears and said, "You changed this family, buddy." "He changed our hearts," Megan added, her voice soft. Liam and Ellie were nestled on the couch, leaning against Buster's warm body. "You're not just a dog," Ellie whispered into his fur. "You're our brave knight." Buster closed his eyes, the fire casting golden light over his brindle coat. He had waited so long behind those shelter gates. But now, his world was full. And the best part? His journey wasn't over yet. Because even in the warmest homes, the biggest adventures often come when you least expect them. The summer that followed Buster's first year with the Graysons was one of the happiest the family had ever known. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen each morning as Megan made breakfast and Buster lay sprawled on the cool tile floor, soaking up the warmth. Tom often joked that Buster was solar-powered, always following patches of sun across the house like a sleepy sundial. The children were out of school, and each day became its own little adventure. Trips to the lake, hikes through the nearby woods, backyard tents and stargazing at night. Through it all, Buster was never more than a few feet away, always watching, always present. But it wasn't just the family that was changing. The neighborhood had started to embrace him too. Kids would call out, "Hi Buster," from their porches. The elderly couple on the corner left bones in their mailbox just for him. Even the local librarian asked if she could take a photo of Buster for a storytime display. Tom had started joking that Buster was the unofficial mayor of the block. Still, no one truly understood how deep Buster's loyalty ran, until the day the accident happened. It was a sweltering afternoon in August when Megan decided to take the kids and Buster to the nearby creek. They packed a picnic and headed down the familiar forest trail, Buster trotting ahead with his tail high, sniffing every tree and shrub like he was on patrol. The creek was low that summer, trickling lazily through its rocky bed. Liam immediately began skipping stones, while Ellie waded in the shallows, her shorts rolled up to her knees. Megan sat on a large flat rock, unpacking sandwiches and fruit. Buster lay in the shade nearby, his tongue lolling out, eyes half closed. Every few minutes he'd glance at the kids, ensuring all was well. Then Ellie slipped. One moment she was giggling in the ankle-deep water, and the next she was gone, her foot catching on a slick rock, sending her tumbling sideways into the deeper middle channel. The water there was just deep enough to cause panic. Her head went under. She flailed, gasping, struggling to find footing. "Ellie!" Megan screamed, launching to her feet. Liam dropped his stones and bolted forward. But Buster was already moving. Without hesitation, he sprinted into the creek. His paws splashed through the water, muscles surging. Ellie surfaced, coughing and crying, before going under again. Buster lunged forward, jaws gently but firmly grabbing the back of her shirt. He pulled. With a deep growl of effort, Buster backed out of the water, dragging Ellie with him toward the rocky shore. Megan reached them seconds later, falling to her knees and scooping her daughter into her arms. Ellie sobbed into her mother's shoulder, soaked and shaking, but safe. Buster stood nearby, dripping and panting, his ears pinned back in worry. "You saved her," Megan whispered, burying her fingers in his soaked fur. "You saved my baby." Later, at the urgent care where Ellie was checked and declared unharmed, the doctor smiled at Buster's soaked appearance and said, "We should be giving him a medal." News of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. A local reporter reached out after Megan's heartfelt Facebook post, and soon there was a picture of Buster on the front page of the community paper, under the headline, "Pit Bull Hero Saves Young Girl." People who had once crossed the street to avoid him now stopped during walks just to say hello. Children asked if they could pet him. Teachers invited Megan to speak to their classes about dog safety and kindness. Buster didn't seem to notice the attention. He still woke up early, nudged the kids awake, and waited patiently for belly rubs. He still wore Ellie's tiaras when asked and stood guard during Liam's long Lego campaigns. But in quiet moments, he'd sit a little closer to Megan, leaning into her side as if to reassure her, "I'm here. I'm always here." A few weeks later, a letter arrived at the house addressed to the Grayson family and Buster. It was from Southridge Animal Rescue. Linda, the shelter volunteer who had once been Buster's only champion, had written the letter by hand. "Dear Graysons, I've read every story about Buster with a full heart and teary eyes. I always knew he was special, but I never imagined how many lives he'd touch once he found his people. I wanted to thank you for giving him the life he always deserved. And I also wanted to ask, would you consider bringing him to the shelter sometime? We've started a new program pairing long-term residents with calm, well-behaved dogs to help them adjust. Some dogs lose hope when they've been waiting too long. But when they see a dog like Buster, who waited and then found love, it gives them something to believe in. With gratitude and love, Linda." Megan read the letter aloud after dinner. Ellie clapped her hands. Liam nodded thoughtfully. "He could be like a big brother for the other dogs," Liam said. "He's already a hero," Ellie added. "Now he can be a teacher too." Tom looked at Buster, who was curled at his feet. "Well, what do you say, buddy? Want to show the shelter dogs what hope looks like?" Buster wagged his tail. The first time Buster stepped back into Southridge, he paused at the entrance. The smells, the sounds, it was all familiar. But he wasn't afraid. He walked in proudly, his family beside him. Linda was waiting. "Oh, Buster," she whispered, falling to her knees and wrapping her arms around him. "Look at you." From that day on, Buster visited the shelter once a week. He'd walk beside the anxious dogs in the outdoor pens, sit patiently near the kennels of those too scared to come out. Sometimes he'd lie down beside a trembling pup, just breathing, offering comfort without words. He became a legend. And when a scared little boxer named Nellie finally stepped out of her kennel after 3 months, it was Buster she walked behind. Years passed. The kids grew taller. The house filled with new memories. Christmases, birthdays, ordinary days made extraordinary by the presence of one loving dog. Buster grew slower, his muzzle turning silver. He didn't leap as high anymore or chase sticks quite as fast. But his heart was as strong as ever. One afternoon, as the family sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Megan leaned her head against Tom's shoulder. "I don't know what we did to deserve him," she said softly. "We opened the door," Tom replied. "He did the rest." Ellie, now older, rested her head on Buster's side. "You saved us too, you know," she whispered to him. "Not just that day at the creek. All the days. Every one of them." Buster blinked slowly, his tail thumping once against the porch floor. He didn't need to speak. They understood. He had been the one in need of saving once. But the family who had chosen him, the family who looked past the labels, the fears, the stereotypes, they had become his world. And in return, he gave them everything. Love, protection, laughter, loyalty without limits. And every morning, when he nudged them awake and waited for the sun to rise across the living room floor, he reminded them. The best hearts don't always come wrapped the way you expect. Sometimes, they come with muscle and scars. And sometimes, they wait patiently in a shelter, just hoping someone will see the truth behind their eyes. Buster had waited, and it had been worth every second.